Hey guys, coming back doing another video. This time I'm going to be tackling the black fatigue issue, or I guess a social media trend that's going around. In my opinion, it's pretty much it's pretty much spot on, and I'm going to be explaining why. And I'm pretty sure you've seen like at least one video or two where I don't know, you have like just a super duper pro bliggity black person trying to defend like the ghetto black people, and it's just a load of bullshit, and that's why I wanted to do this video. I see a lot of the same issues and a lot of the same tropes and the same tactics from the student loan issue. I did a previous video about student loans and how, well, I guess student loans were being somewhat tied in to a possible economic breakdown, because student loans occurring around the same time as DEI and all that stuff, people losing their jobs. And I kind of just pinpointed to, well, if you want to, I guess, track when a lot of jobs were being lost and what brought us to this point where we have like an insane amount of unemployment, you'd have to start with NAFTA. And essentially, well, the history of NAFTA, a ton of jobs were sent away by Bill Clinton. Essentially, NAFTA was probably the pioneering event that led to like the downfall of the U.S. economy. But in this situation, I noticed that when there is a person, I guess, just, and let's be honest, it's all races of people. It's not just white people. It's the productive black people, Hispanic people, Asian people. You're kind of just tired of like just the face of American culture being not the productive people, including blacks, but the just extremely fucking ratchet black. And essentially, you're being told or somewhat forced to just deal with it. And I wanted to start with going back to the history. So, of course, you probably learned this in school. In the 1950s, there was a great migration of Southern blacks moving up north. And for some reason, in the history books and, public schools, they have this weird, what I want to call it. They have this weird fantasy of just, blacks moving up north. Everything was peachy keen. This is during the Industrial Revolution. So, just every single black that came up north was getting jobs. I mean, that's not what happened. Unfortunately, we have to talk about the reality. Northern blacks in the 1950s weren't very receptive to Southern blacks. And the reason why, I guess you could, if you're thinking of going this way, I guess you could try to formulate an argument about some sort of colorism. But honestly, from what I've read, it has a lot to do with Northern blacks being more refined, more studious, hard workers, prim and proper, if you want to, I guess, be anal about it. Just all around culture. There's a thriving society, and Northern blacks they found their place in it. As opposed to Southern blacks, where, of course, they're not that refined as they were coming up here. They're somewhat crass, they're rude, braggadocious. Everything they do, I guess, was apparently, it was, I read an article that said elevated arrogance. So you can kind of put two and two together what that means. They're probably fucking assholes, Like nowadays, if you see like a regular black person maybe heading to work, you kind of don't really know what they're about. Maybe you say hi and bye, but then you see like just the ghetto ass black person heading to work. They're loud, cell phone. Instead of the cell phone being to their fucking ear how it's supposed to be, or with a Bluetooth, the fucking phone's 15 feet in front of their face, and they're screaming at it. And you're kind of just like, well, goddamn, dude, it's a fucking phone. Put it to your ear. And don't, I wish you would say something to him. You might fuck around and get attacked. That's the kind of behavior I'm talking about. So apparently there was a great divide in the 50s with the great migration of Southern blacks moving up north. So apparently this led to the very first generation of like black suburbs. So something I can speak of, I know a little bit about here in Detroit. There was something called Black Bottom, where 75 freeway started downtown. So Of course, I wasn't, this is before my time, but from what I can ascertain, the Black Bottom was somewhat of half ghetto and half like suburban black. And of course, this is during Jim Crow. So Jim Crow has to be the umbrella of you're trying to put two and two together and kind of get a picture of the time frame. Jim Crow, got to talk about it. It's basically the umbrella sitting over black bottoms and black cities where Southern blacks are moving to. So, of course, Northern blacks are moving away from Southern blacks. They find them to be crass, rude, or whatever. And then, bam, smack dab 1960s. Now you have factors such as welfare, civil rights, feminism. You know what I mean? And the first, and this last part is just going to be from information I ascertained myself and somewhat put it together with the Great Migration to kind of try to make it make sense. So the last part is going to be the initial death of social norms. And what I mean by that is, and it's kind of pathetic when you talk to a lot of like black people and maybe like a few, when you talk to Caucasian females, they tend to try to ignore this part. But at this point in history, it's very easy to find. There was a great divide amongst like the civil rights movement. Because once again, when you read the history books, it's painted as if Southern blacks were, marching. You got your Dr. Kings and you got your the bombings, the Baptist Street Church. Everyone just came together and they was marching for the same thing. They have the same principles, and that's actually not what happened, according to a lot of information I read. Basically, you had your Bamas, which were your Southern blacks, marching for peace and freedom, which there's nothing wrong with that. Then you had Northern blacks who essentially they were just trying to get equal treatment. Then a third faction that eventually took over civil rights was feminism. So essentially, towards the late 60s, feminism kind of just came in. And, usurped the shit out of the civil rights movement. And by the 1970s, the focus was on civil rights. The focus was on feminism. The reason this is important is because, and this is always going to be probably some kind of like debate or something or whatever. We were living under organized chaos, so to speak. That's kind of what patriarchy does. Like, we set rules, not for ourselves, not for power trips, but essentially men set rules because it keeps shit in order. It keeps modesty in order. It keeps crime in order. It keeps our lifestyle in order. It keeps shit in order. So essentially during the 60s, especially towards the end of the 60s, going to the 70s, you started to see a ton of pushback, which that will make it the beginning of third wave feminism. So, the sexual freedom and, I can work as much as I want, which is fine. I agree with that. But understanding this comes with, repercussions and consequences. When it comes to black people, most certainly Bamas, with the 1970s rolling in, it saw a rise to double quotas. Now, this is important because essentially double quotas and DEI are two concepts we're still dealing with to this day. And unfortunately, with double quotas being kind of instituted in the 1970s, it gave an opportunity for people like Bamas. This is to make people like Bamas to get jobs. This is where you start to get those stereotypes, like just the rude ghetto black motherfucker got the DMV or Secretary of State. Clearly, no one has done shit to them to have this fucked up attitude, but they just got one. They're foul mouth like me. They're foul mouth, very unrefined, impatient. You're working a job that's customer facing, but you're impatient. It's kind of stupid for you to be here, kind of redundant. For the Bama blacks that came here from the 50s, if it wasn't for, and this is, I'm narrowing down the pathway to black fatigue, so I'm not going to mention everything. I'm not going to make it any more confusing than it already is. So if it wasn't for things like double quotas, the Bamas essentially wouldn't have been able to integrate to the workforce, because you have to think about the the times and how we structure jobs and job applicants and resumes. Okay, you can't be a fucking Bama with an attitude, sitting down at GM somewhere, telling the manager what you is and ain't gonna do. Like, that doesn't work. Okay, they probably say, get the fuck out of the chair. Get out of here. We're not hiring. But if you start to pay attention to the end of the 60s, that hard push for feminism, one thing that really didn't figure out was, okay, well, you can work. No one can tell you what to do. But unfortunately, you really don't have a long-term plan of how you're going to get into the workforce, because before the 60s, the workforce, the industrial workforce was mostly men. And I mean, women had jobs, they just weren't, they weren't part of the same sectors. So when it comes to black Bama women, they were able to integrate into the industrial workforce through things like double quotas. And this, once again, this is the beginning of the destruction of social norms. Because bam, the fucking 1980s. And I mean, I don't really have to explain the 80s. If you are, anything from a Gen Xer to a boomer, or the oldest group of millennials, maybe even mid-range millennials too, you remember, parts of the 80s. It was just a microcosm of all the shit that led to probably the destruction of societal norms. So from the dopes, the gangs, the rap music, the explosion of single motherism. Unfortunately, with all of this shit comes the prevalence of the Bama male becoming the preferred male in the black community. And what I mean by this is the same time period where if you are a productive male, let's say you're a productive black man, you've got a decent job, maybe you're in college, and if this is the 80s, you're probably paying off your fucking degree with a summer job. You were seen as less desirable, you're seen as a fucking loser, and you were seen as a nothing, as compared to the fucking gang member standing outside with, that illegal ass python in his pants, pause, and a pocket full of dope. He's seen as the winner in the black community. And these people tended to be, I know you don't want to hear it, and if you go back through history, you'll see some of the biggest kingpins, all the way from your fucking Frank Lucases, your fucking freeway Ricky Ross, your Frank Matthews. All of these men were fucking Bamas, okay? Their parents and their cousins and everyone in the dope game with them were fucking Bamas. So these men were seen as more valuable than the productive black man. And then you started to see, this is right on par with the double quotas from the 70s, now leaning into the 80s, where the Bama women, sorry, I'm going to keep it together. The Bama women who have infiltrated the fucking workforce are now hooking up with the Bama guys on the fucking street. So now the image of black culture has mostly become, and which we know this isn't true, we know that overall, during the 80s, there was productive black people, hardworking people who wanted to just build family and survive. But unfortunately, the international image became drug dealing. And, the Shaniqua, that's the stereotype of the Shaniqua, just a loudmouth DMV fast food bitch with an attitude. So that also, in the 1980s, is important to note, in my opinion. I'm sure someone has a different one. But I noticed in the 1980s, that was the first time that the black community we somewhat championed the narrative of the big mama. And what I mean by that is, and we're just going to call it what it is. We know that the big mama shit is a code word. It's a code word for matriarchy, which essentially is the ultimate goal of any sort of feminist movement. To make everything a matriarchy, where you're not necessarily following established rules that are proved to work, but you have the power to make your own rules. And if they work, it doesn't matter because you're in charge. So I'll get back to that shit later, trust me. I got some shit to talk about it. So the 1990s, I know that the 80s are somewhat pegged as being, that was just the pinnacle of counterculture, which I agree. Gen X, you guys are awesome. You guys said, fuck the system, fuck all this goofy shit to where only the, top 20, 30% benefits, but you play by the rules and you don't benefit. You guys are great. But I would say the early 90s would have to be probably the kick in the balls to social norms. Because, I mean, this is where, and I'm talking like your Sally Jesse Raphael, your Jenny Jones, just your daytime television completely fucking dogging like black man and the black family. And I like to point out, and I'm sure you guys will notice this shit too, if you're old enough. You ever notice when they were doing this shit in the 90s, just dogging out, oh, the black man will take care of their kids and all this shit. The person they would be essentially attacking would be that studious black man I was telling you about earlier. The one with the family, the job, maybe he's looking to do things better for himself. But then, when you listen to what they're complaining about, they were talking about the fucking Pookie and the Ray Ray. Which is like, well, wait a minute. Okay, I agree that guy is a piece of shit. Okay, why are you championing him then? Why can I go to any black community and the majority of the women, productive or not, are fucking with Pookies and Ray Rays? Okay, your message tends to get fucked up there. And then on top of that, I noticed, in addition to dragging like the black man, the nuclear family, it was, I think the 90s, in my opinion, the early 90s was the biggest attack on like just the patriarchy period. Where it appears that American society wanted to take the corrective power away from fathers, period. So this is where you would see, for example, the slutty culture of like the mid 90s. If there's like a dad that's like going to get his daughter from being down the street flirting with boys, he would get attacked publicly. You know what I mean? Especially like if you're from a black neighborhood. You can't be telling that girl what to do and all this other bullshit. And it's like, okay, well, if a father can't correct her, who can? And once again, a lot of this shit is coming from the Bamas. Because before, and I'm going to stand on this fucking hill, when it comes to like ghetto black shit, before the Bamas migrated, it kind of really didn't exist when you start reading up on the 1950s and 60s. See, I noticed that the media, and even black people, even like overly sensitive fucking democratic black people, they tend to just hyper focus on fucking race. Okay, they tend to ignore like social norms and shit. Okay, in the 1950s, there was a lot of shit going, not just race. Okay, I'm sorry, that's a huge fucking part of it. I'll admit that, but it wasn't just race. There was a lot of things going on, and I noticed that a lot of people, the media, people you talk to in your private life, they tend to hyper focus on race. And honestly, if the Great Migration would have never happened, I think there's room for argument that the black image wouldn't be so bad. Honestly. So moving on, after the 90s essentially attacking the patriarchy, you have the 2000s. Now, the 2000s is probably the fucking 2000s, man. That's probably the biggest kick in the balls to any kind of law and order we had in this country. Because now I noticed in the 2000s what was attacked the absolute most, not just structure and order from, ghetto ass blacks, but shame. I noticed like there was a lot of, and maybe it's just me because I'm a male, and males, we don't get the benefit of the doubt. We don't get the, oh, I feel sorry for you bullshit. You either perform or you don't. That's just how it is with a man. So the 2000s saw a rise to shit like the Biggest Beautiful movement. I know it originated in the 80s, but we're talking about publicly, when people were saying this shit publicly. I remember the 2000s gave the biggest rise to like the Biggest Beautiful shit, where instead of a woman with a few extra pounds being seen as attractive, which could be, they were pretty much praising women who were morbidly fucking obese. And they're doing that shit to this day. The beginning of like the really, really hardcore slut culture. So once again, that's something else that originated with the beginning of third wave feminism in the 80s. But publicly, it started to be really, really brought to the forefront around the 90s, especially with like, Tupac, I Get Around videos and shit like that. Then you have like the Big Pimpin' video for the rapper Jay-Z, where it was just all like every woman was just walking around pretty much with her ass out. And it's like, I remember those videos were censored back in the day, but they're not now. And if you say anything during that time frame, if you were to say anything, you would be called, Sambo, Uncle Tom, oh, you ain't keeping that out, all this other bullshit. And all you're doing is highlighting, well, wait a minute. We're forever talking about wanting better neighborhoods in the black community, but we're steady doing shit to where we're praising the most debaucherous, degenerate bullshit that you can find. Okay, it's not making fucking sense. You know what I mean? So, and in the 2000s, I got to come back to it because it's relevant till this day. The big mama culture shit. So I know that you notice, you don't even have to be a black person for this. Every culture, there's a patriarch. There's a line of fucking patriarchs. There's a line of men who risked their fucking lives. Half of them died, half of them didn't, to build wealth and prosperity in their fucking families. When it comes to black people, especially ghetto-ass black people, they tend to have merged counterculture and this feminist bullshit to just overly praise the big mama culture. Now, the reason why this is a fucking problem and why the big mama culture births so many, ghetto blacks and people you just can't really deal with, you have to look at what those movements stand for. Okay, it doesn't matter what, a person feels. Because if you just look up the definition of civil rights or feminism, of course, the definitions are going to be laden with emotion. That's why you might look up, oh, yeah, it's about the equal treatment of men and women. But then, what things have actually happened during the feminist time? It'll start listing a bunch of shit that benefits women. And doesn't really, it literally, it's a huge slope of shit that's taken from men and given to women. And that destroys the definition given to you right then and there. Okay, how is it equality? But then it's showing me shit that you took from men to give to women. Or civil rights, on the other hand, it's, okay, well, it's about equal treatment. Okay, well, what has happened since the iteration of civil rights? Oh, well, actually, we take shit from other races to give to black people. Well, wait a fucking minute. Well, that's not equal. You're just taking from other races of people and giving it to black people. So, getting back to the point with this big mama culture bullshit, what it does, it highlights what feminism and civil rights really are. They're movements based on circular reasoning and emotional pleas. What I mean by circular reasoning is, if you notice, every time you talk to a person that was especially an old ass boomer black man, they're always talking about things. Oh, we didn't get this back in the 50s. We didn't get that. They're overly highlighting, they're hyper focusing on the negatives, which it was pretty fucking negative. I'll never take that away from, black people that have to deal with racism. But then they'll ignore either the reasons why things were the way they were or any possible benefits. So let's say, for example, when you come up north, I noticed, and this is just brief research, you can do more, I don't know a lot about it. I know that to avoid some of the issues they were having in the South in the 50s, up north, they had a separate bus system for a lot of blacks. And the reasons why is because, of course, racist whites, just in case they want to attack you. Now, looking at this fact through the eyes of a super duper pro biggity black, they're only going to focus on a separate bus system. You know what I mean? They're only going to, it's just they was trying to stay away from us. Where looking at it objectively, it kind of seems as if the powers that be understood you just can't stop racism at this time. So maybe it's better to have two separate bus systems to limit one person attacking the other, as opposed to having this weird forced integration too soon. And now you have shit like random stabbings on the bus all the time, or random fucking shootings, or random groups of white boys, shooting black dudes. Okay, instead of having all that shit, how about we just have two separate bus systems until we find a better solution? You know what I mean? And even on the feminist side, we couldn't have credit cards. That's a very common argument where, okay, that makes sense. And, you couldn't have credit cards. But I would like to highlight, on the other end of that spectrum, you were being taken care of. It wasn't really accepted. It wasn't really widely accepted to be a bum ass dude back in those days, unless you absolutely had no choice. You just couldn't find work. You know what I mean? So it appears that Big Mama culture is based on emotional pleas and circular reasoning, and this became the fucking matriarch of the black community. So now most, for example, little boys, okay, we can talk all we want and have our own emotional opinions and shit. Little boy needs a fucking father, okay? You have like a 90, no, I'm sorry. I believe officially it's like a 70% chance a little boy will end up in prison, jail, gang dead if a father doesn't guide him from age 12 onwards to adulthood. Same thing with little girls. If there isn't a strong male role model essentially keeping her fucking head on straight, stopping her from becoming a single mother, stopping her from stopping her from riding with boys and cars and shit. If there isn't a strong male role model to stop her, there's a good chance she's going to be another statistic. Big Mama culture essentially eliminates the strong male role model. That's where that shit popped up. Like, if you notice, going back to the 90s for a minute, all of the, black films that could have been used as some sort of like launching pad to get the family back together. I know Boys in the Hood wasn't really the best film, but at least it showed a strong father. Out of all the fucking films in the 90s, what was highlighted the absolute most was this movie called Soul Food. And the movie called Soul Food highlighted how this dysfunctional ass family was somewhat held together by a big mama, the matriarch of the family. And then when she died, it was complete fucking chaos in the family. And towards the end of the film, of course it's fiction, towards the end of the film, it was just love for one another that made them put their petty differences aside and work together. Okay, take the framework of that film and apply it to the majority of black families in America. And take away the fairy tale shit. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. When there's a matriarch without a strong patriarch setting any sort of boundaries, the offspring tend to be fucking little demon spawns. You end up with majority of the women, as I stated earlier, chasing the criminals for possible spouses for the better part of 40-something years. And then, once they become, single moms and all this other shit, trying to get society, I mentioned welfare earlier, trying to get government, society, and productive black men to clean up their mess. Or even on the black man side, okay, with no strong fathers and just under the tutelage of fucking Big Mama and a house full of women, instead of black men becoming largely productive, stoic world builders, they tend to be fucking emotional. We tend to be emotional. I ain't even gonna lie to you. I fell in that category for a long ass time. We tend to be overly emotional. That's how you end up with cities like fucking Chicago, where there's like, I think at its peak, within the past 6 years, there was one year, there was like 700 murders, some shit. And when you highlight this, these people try to talk you down. Oh, no big deal. Bullshit. Man, that shit ain't normal. You might go across the fucking world to a war-torn country and never see shit like that. Why the fuck is there 700 murders in this little ass city or this mid-sized city? That's fucking insane. Like, what? So you can easily say, if these people, the ghetto blacks, try to shout you down, try to use some sort of, race trick to make you stop talking because you're dealing with black fatigue, you can know good and goddamn well the lack of masculinity, the presence of Big Mama culture, and government backing of ghetto bullshit has also made black people stricken with black fatigue. Yeah.